Chapter 1. The Forest's Bargain. The wind howled through the trees, a mournful wail that echoed across the misty expanse of the northern vale. Birds had long ceased their singing, and even the rustling of the leaves seemed hushed, as if the forest itself held its breath. Among the towering oaks and curling vines wandered a lone figure, small and barefoot, her cloak tattered and soaked with dew. Her name was Elira. She had no last name, no family crest, no village to call home. The plague had swept through her hamlet when she was just a child, leaving her with only a memory of her mother's lullaby and the worn leather satchel she now carried. Since then, she had wandered the edges of civilization, sleeping in barns or under stars, whispering prayers to gods no one remembered. But tonight, her path had shifted. She had wandered too far north, into the forbidden wood where no fire dared burn and no hunter dared tread. It was said that beasts ruled these lands, not the kind that crawled or flew, but those who walked as men by day and prowled as monsters by moonlight. She'd heard the stories, everyone had, of the Lycan King, the Wolf King who ruled the Shadow Pine with his pack of cursed warriors. They said he was taller than any man, with eyes like moonlit ice and a voice that could summon storms. They said he claimed a bride once every generation, and those who were taken were never seen again. Elira had scoffed at those tales, until the howls began. She had been gathering mushrooms near a hollow tree when the first one came. A low, guttural howl, followed by others, closer, surrounding. She had frozen in place, her basket slipping from her fingers. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. Wolves, larger than horses, with fur dark as night and eyes that gleamed silver. They didn't snarl, they didn't charge. They circled her in eerie silence, forming a living ring of muscle and fur and quiet command. One stepped forward, massive, with a crescent-shaped mark of white fur over one eye. He lowered his head and sniffed the air around her. And then he bowed. Elira's heart pounded. She backed away, tripping over a root. But before she could scramble to her feet, a deeper presence filled the air, like the forest had exhaled after centuries of waiting. He stepped through the trees without sound. Not beast, not fully man. His form shimmered between the two. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a mane of dark hair falling over eyes that burned with pale fire. His clothes were little more than pelts and furs wrapped around him, but his presence was regal, commanding, terrifying. "Elira of no name," he said, his voice like thunder rolling over distant hills. "You have stepped into my domain." She couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The wolves drew back slightly, watching her with strange reverence. The Lycan King stepped closer, and with each step, the earth seemed to tilt. "The moon has spoken. You are the offering." Her eyes widened. I didn't come to offer anything," she stammered, trembling. "I was only passing through." "The forest does not accept accidents," he interrupted gently, though his tone left no room for argument. "It calls who it chooses. And you were chosen." Elira shook her head. "I have nothing to give." A strange smile curved his lips. "You have everything, Orphan. You are unbound, unclaimed, wild, the perfect mate for a king without chains." Before she could run, before she could scream, his arms encircled her like a cage. Warmth rushed through her, a wild, unnatural warmth that stole her strength. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the shimmering edge of his smile, and the soft fall of snowflakes over the wolf's fur. Then silence. The forest had claimed its bargain. Chapter 2. The Moonlit Keep. Elira awoke to the scent of pine, smoke, and something rich and unplaceable. Like the warm musk of fur after rain. She was no longer in the forest. She lay on a bed softer than anything she'd ever known, wrapped in thick woolen blankets and resting atop layers of furs stitched into the hide of some beast twice the size of any ox. Above her, the ceiling soared with wooden beams shaped like antlers, their curves lit by flickering sconces. The room itself was circular, stone walls carved with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the firelight. At the far end stood a narrow window, through which moonlight spilled like liquid silver. Elira sat up slowly, her limbs sore but intact. Her cloak was gone, replaced by a clean linen shift that fell to her knees. Her satchel rested beside the bed, untouched. She was not bound, not guarded, not harmed. Yet every instinct screamed, prisoner. She moved to the window. Far below, a wild valley stretched out, dotted with mist and black pines. The castle, or keep, more accurately, rose from the mountain like it had grown from the earth itself. its turrets crowned with moss and stone fangs. There were no roads, no villagers, only howling wind and snow-dusted trees for miles. A place meant never to be found. You're awake. She spun around. The Lycan King stood in the doorway, arms folded, his presence impossible to ignore. By daylight, or whatever light this was, he looked more man than wolf. Tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and eyes that shimmered a pale silver blue. His jaw was sharp, his hair long and unruly, and he wore a robe made of fur draped over one bare shoulder. I want to leave, Elira said at once, clutching the edge of the window frame for courage. He stepped inside. Of course. She blinked. He continued, you may leave. The doors are open. The path is yours. But the forest will not let you go. What does that mean? He tilted his head, regarding her as one might study a wild bird. The forest chose you. You crossed the boundary that others dare not. And now it marks you. You are a part of it. Part of us. I'm not one of you, she said quickly. I'm not a wolf. No, he agreed. You're not yet. Yet? He walked to the hearth and stirred the fire with a carved bone rod. Sparks lifted into the air like golden insects. The bond must be accepted. You must willingly stay. If you do not, you may go. But you will never find the same world again. Elira's mind raced. Was it magic? Madness? A dream? Why me? She whispered. He paused. Because the old moon chose you. Because you are unclaimed by men, gods, or land. Because you feel the pull, even now, though you do not know it. She did feel it, a strange pull in her chest, like a thread wound around her heart, tugging toward him. Toward this place. He walked toward her slowly. I am Alder, son of Hakon, last of the moonborn bloodline. I have ruled alone for 40 winters. But the time has come for the pact to renew. She looked up at him. And you think I'll just accept that? That I'll stay here and be, what? Your captive queen? He smiled softly. Captive, number chosen, Elira, but not yet mine. You will stay 3 nights. At the end of the 3rd, the bond will complete. If you allow it. Or you may leave and never look back. But know this, once you've crossed into the heart of the forest, there is no such thing as returning unchanged. He turned and walked toward the door. Before exiting, he said, you are not a prisoner here. You are a guest of the moon court. Then he was gone. And Elira, orphan of the south, stood alone in a castle built for beasts, with only the wind and her own heartbeat for company. Chapter 3. The Whispering Pack. The days in the moon court did not pass as they did in the villages Elira once knew. There was no sun, only the shifting phases of moonlight that bathed the castle in different shades of silver. Each hour seemed to hum with strange life, and the keep itself felt less like a structure, and more like a living, breathing creature. Its stones held warmth. Its walls listened. On the morning of her 2nd day, Elira wandered through the halls of the keep, unsure if she was looking for answers or simply trying to stay ahead of the quiet pull in her chest. The corridors were adorned with symbols carved deep into stone. Moons, wolves, trees, and something that looked like a circle of stars around a woman with outstretched hands. No servants scurried about, yet fires stayed lit and food appeared fresh in the great hall. She hadn't seen Alder again, not since the night he left her with those impossible words. You're not a prisoner, you're a guest. But guests weren't watched from the shadows. She felt it, eyes on her from unseen corners, quiet footsteps behind her that vanished when she turned. She sensed movement in the tapestry of the walls, like figures who moved only when unlooked at. And sometimes she heard the howling, not just from far away, from within. That afternoon, she discovered a courtyard at the center of the keep. Snow blanketed its stones, but the fountain at its heart still ran, fed by some unseen warmth beneath the earth. Trees ringed the space, tall and white with bark that shimmered like pearl. She stepped closer to the fountain and saw her reflection, pale, wary, older than her 18 years. Then another figure appeared behind her in the water. She turned swiftly. It was not Alder. It was a woman, tall, dark-skinned, with braids woven through with feathers and beads. Her eyes were bright gold, and her clothing was layered furs and bone necklaces. You're the new one, the woman said, voice smooth and amused. I expected someone taller. Elira stood her ground. Who are you? Vesa, huntmaster of the King's Pack. She moved with easy strength, circling Elira the way the wolves had. You smell of fear and defiance, a rare perfume. Elira frowned. Do you always treat strangers like prey? Vesa smiled, baring white teeth. Only the ones who think they aren't. She stopped circling and folded her arms. You have questions. Ask. Elira hesitated, then gave in. What does he mean when he says I've been chosen? I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be part of some ancient ritual. No one ever does, Vesa replied with a shrug. The forest calls those it deems worthy, those who walk its line and carry no ties to the mortal world. The bond is not a trap, it's an echo. It means your soul matches his. You're his balance. But Elira stopped herself. I'm just a girl, a foundling. I don't have magic or lineage. I don't even know who my parents were. Exactly, Vesa said, eyes sharp. You are not weighed down by bloodlines or burdens. The forest sees only truth. And you, girl, are raw truth. Elira sat on the edge of the fountain, overwhelmed. And if I refuse? Vesa's smile faded. Then the king will let you go. He cannot force the bond. But once marked, the forest will always know you. You'll never live as you once did. The pull will grow, even across oceans. Elira stared into the fountain again. Why him? Why now? Visa's voice turned quiet. Because he is the last of his kind. And without a mate, the moonline dies. The magic breaks. The forest fades. He may be king, but he is also cursed with time. Elira didn't speak. The quiet water rippled at her reflection's edges. Visa looked up at the sky above. The moon had shifted. Its light now glowed softly pink, the color of awakening. Tomorrow night, she said, is the third moon. Decide then, but know this. He has never offered the bond twice. If you walk away from more than just a throne. Then she was gone, silent as a shadow. Elira stared up at the changing moon. Something inside her stirred. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Forest. That night, Elira couldn't sleep. The walls of her chamber felt too tight. The furs too warm. The silence too loud. Every breath she took was steeped in the weight of choice. She had spent her life slipping between villages, hiding from fate, avoiding roots or promises. But now, in a castle made of moonlight and stone, she was being asked to decide something eternal. Unable to bear it, she dressed and slipped into the hall. Guided only by instinct and the hum of distant wind, she passed through the great hall where the stone fireplace crackled with silver flames. She descended staircases carved into living rock and emerged through a hidden door beneath the eastern wing. The air hit her with cold clarity as she stepped outside into the garden of sleeping trees. Snow crunched beneath her feet, soft and soundless. The moon above was nearly full, painted with a soft blush that pulsed like a living heart. As she moved beyond the outer wall of the keep, the landscape began to change. The pines stood taller, their bark gleaming with frost. The wind sang in low tones, and every breath of air carried whispers not spoken aloud. She was not alone. A soft growl reached her ears. Elira turned slowly. A great wolf stood at the edge of the clearing. Its fur was dark bronze, eyes pale and glowing. But it wasn't Alder. This wolf was smaller, still massive, but leaner, younger. Then, in a ripple of shimmering light, the wolf shifted. A man stood where the beast had been, barely older than her, with tousled chestnut hair and a broad scar across his collarbone. He wore no crown, no armor, just a fur-draped cloak and the silence of the forest. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said. I couldn't sleep. He nodded, eyes scanning the trees. The forest is alive tonight. She watches you. Elira tilted her head. You talk like her, like Visa, like Alder. The man's mouth curved into a wistful smile. I was born in these woods. My first breath was taken beneath the blood moon. My name is Kale. I am the youngest of the 12. The 12? The firstborns of the moon court. We serve the king, protect the realm, die when called. He said it plainly, without sadness. Elira hesitated. Why tell me this? Because I remember what it's like to be human. Before the bond, before the forest mark. He stepped closer, his expression softening. You still carry fear, but it is changing. Elira folded her arms. What happens if I say yes? Truly. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke gently. Then you become more than Elira, of no name. You become queen of the moonborn. The first in a generation. The bond will awaken your gifts. You'll feel the forest's heartbeat. You'll know the minds of the pack. You'll walk between wolf and woman. Forever. And if I say no? Then we vanish from your life like fog in the sun. But the call never stops. A sudden gust of wind blew between them, lifting her hair like a banner. The moonlight brightened, and in the center of the forest clearing, the trees parted. A figure stepped into view. Alder. His bare feet made no sound. His robe hung open at the throat, and his eyes gleamed silver. The moment he entered the clearing, everything else faded. Kale stepped back with a low bow. Elira felt her heart tremble. Alder held out his hand. Come with me. She didn't move. Where? To the heart of the forest. To the place only you may enter beside me. She hesitated. Then, drawn by something older than memory, she reached out and took his hand. The moment their fingers touched, warmth burst through her body, not like heat from a fire, but like a light awakening beneath her skin. The trees bowed, the moon pulsed. He led her deeper into the woods, where the snow melted under their feet, and the pines arched to form a living canopy. They passed streams that glowed with blue light and rocks carved with ancient faces. Time stilled. Then they reached it, a clearing ringed with white stones. At its center stood a massive tree, its bark silver, its leaves glowing softly. This, Alder said, is where the Moonborn were born. This is where my mother offered her soul to the forest and gave me my name. And this is where the bond must be sealed. Elira stepped toward the tree, her breath catching. It felt familiar. She turned to him. Why me? Alder's voice was raw. Because the moon whispered your name before I ever heard it. Because you are the first soul whose presence silences the howl in my chest. Because you are not afraid to question. And because you belong to no one, just as I belong to nothing, except this land. She looked at the tree, at the stones, at the snow, and then back at him. I'm afraid, she said quietly. So was I, he whispered. She reached for his hand again. The forest exhaled. Chapter 5. The Bond of Moon and Blood. As their hands clasped beneath the silver-leaved tree, the forest stilled completely. No wind, no rustling, no distant howls. Even the snow seemed frozen mid-fall. The world was watching. Elira's breath came shallowly as Alder stepped forward, their fingers still entwined. A faint light pulsed from the ground beneath the tree, traveling through the stones in a perfect circle. Each stone lit in turn, 12 in all, until the clearing shimmered with a soft glow. This is the rite of joining, Alder said, voice hushed with reverence. It does not chain. It does not bind. It only reveals. He brought their joined hands to his chest. You must speak the truth of yourself. Only then will the forest accept you. Elira swallowed. Her voice felt small in the great silence, but she spoke. I am Elira. I have no mother, no father, no home. I have wandered from fire to fire, hoping someone would keep me. I feared belonging and feared being forgotten. I have never felt whole. The light from the stones flared, then steadied. Alder's gaze never left hers. I am Alder, son of Hakon, born under the hunter's moon. I have ruled without mate, child, or kin. I have watched time wear down the wild, watched my people forget joy. I have waited for the one whose soul stirs the howl in mine. As the last word left his lips, the tree responded. Its trunk glowed softly, and from its roots emerged tendrils of silver mist that curled around their feet, rising like smoke. Elira felt warmth travel through her legs, up her spine, into her chest, as though the earth itself were breathing into her bones. Alder gently touched her brow with his thumb. If you accept, the bond will awaken what lies dormant in you. It may hurt, but pain is the gate to power. I'm not strong, she whispered. You are, but the world taught you to forget. Elira closed her eyes. In the silence, she heard something deep, a heartbeat not her own, a rhythm older than language. She opened her eyes. I accept. The moment the words left her mouth, light burst around them. The silver mist wrapped around her, and the air hummed with energy. Her knees buckled, but Alder caught her, holding her as her body convulsed, not with pain, but with revelation. She saw herself standing on 2 legs and running on 4. She saw stars and fangs, trees and claws, blood and moonlight. She saw Alder, not as a man, but as something vast and wild, a creature of shadow and loyalty. And she saw herself, golden-eyed and untamed, a flame in the darkness. When it ended, she collapsed against him, gasping. Alder knelt beside her, cradling her face in his hands. It is done. Elira blinked. What am I? You are Moonborn, he said with quiet awe. The last and the first, my equal. The stones dimmed, but the tree remained softly aglow. In the distance, a chorus of howls erupted, rising in celebration. Elira stood, her legs trembling but sure. Something was different. Her senses were sharper. She could smell the moss underfoot, hear the flutter of a moth's wings yards away, and in her chest was a warmth. A bond, a tether of light stretching between her and Alder, unbreakable and real. He bowed his head to her, not as a ruler, but as a mate. She touched his cheek. I'm not afraid anymore. Chapter 6. A Queen for the Wild. The return to the keep was unlike any walk Elira had ever taken. Where once the forest felt like a haunting, now it felt like a hymn. The trees no longer loomed. They welcomed. The shadows no longer hid monsters. They watched with reverence. And the snow underfoot was not cold, but carried a softness, like the first breath of dawn. Alder walked beside her, not ahead, no longer leading, no longer waiting. They moved as one. When they reached the castle gates, the great stone doors opened on their own. Inside, the 12 stood in formation, each in their furs, each in their half-wolf eyes, heads bowed low. Kale was the first to step forward. He pressed his hand to his heart and knelt. Moon Mother. Elira blinked, startled. What? Alder turned to her, smiling gently. You are now the Moon Court's queen, not in name only, but in soul. You are the forest's breath, as I am its strength. Together, we are balance. Vesa approached next. She carried a crown, not of gold or jewels, but of woven branches, crescent bones, and moonstone. You don't need this to rule, she said, but tradition has its roots. With slow, deliberate hands, Vesa placed the crown upon Elira's head, and the howls began, echoing through the castle halls, rising from the towers, flooding in from the forest beyond. The whole pack, dozens, maybe hundreds of voices, sang in a chorus that trembled the walls and reached the mountaintops. It wasn't wildness, it wasn't rage, it was welcome. Alder turned to her. Will you walk among them as queen? Elira's voice was steady. Yes. The grand doors to the courtyard opened and she stepped out, bare feet against the cold stone, as snow fell gently around her. The courtyard was full, wolves in every color and size, their eyes bright with silver, their fur glowing beneath the pink moon. They bowed one by one as she passed. When she reached the center of the courtyard, she lifted her face to the moon. Something within her stirred, a warmth rising from her chest to her skin, her breath quickening. Then, without warning, she dropped to her knees, and her body shifted. Not painfully, fluidly. She fell forward and fur spread across her limbs. Her arms shortened, spine curved, vision sharpened into hues of silver and blue. She was a wolf. Her coat was pure white with a streak of gold down her spine. Gasps and howls rose again. Even Alder's eyes widened. No moon queen had ever borne that coloring. She rose on 4 legs, turned to the pack, and released her first howl. A long, haunting, beautiful note that vibrated through every stone, every tree, every living thing in the realm. And they answered. When she shifted back, Alder wrapped her in his cloak and held her close. His eyes brimmed with something deeper than pride, something ancient and joyful. You are more than I ever dreamed, he whispered. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed, heart full. I feel like I've woken from a very long sleep. You have. That night, the keep feasted for the first time in decades. Music returned to the halls, laughter spilled through corridors, and the great fires blazed high. Elira was no longer a girl with no home. She was Elira of the Moon Court, and the wild had found its queen. Chapter 7. The First Winter of the Bond. Winter fell deeper across the realm, but the cold no longer touched Elira the way it once had. Something inside her burned steady now, a constant fire in her bones, fed by the bond and the forest's ancient magic. Snow came heavier, blanketing the land in soft silence, and still the Moon Court thrived. Elira rose each day before the silver sun breached the mountaintops. She walked the eastern terrace barefoot, listening to the wind, reading its murmurs like pages of a book. Her senses had grown sharper with each passing sunrise. She could hear the heartbeat of wolves in the stables, smell fresh snowfall before the clouds had thickened, and sense Alder's presence no matter how far he roamed. Though the right had bound them, they still lived as equals, not tethered but intertwined. Alder gave her space to learn and rise in her own time. He offered no commands, only questions. What do you see when you look at the stars? He had asked one night, the two of them wrapped in fur blankets on the tower roof. Stories, she had answered, but also possibilities, like the sky is holding its breath for what comes next. He had only smiled and said, then write your story across it. And she did. Each day, Elira trained with Vesa, learning not only the ways of the hunt, but the old lore of the Moonborn. She ran the mountain trails in wolf form, her golden streak a beacon against the white hills. She learned to listen for the forest's moods, to feel its warnings in the sway of the trees and the flicker of stars. Kale taught her how to dance, old ritual steps performed under full moons. It's not about beauty, he told her. It's about balance, the rhythm of things. And when the moon was darkest, Alder took her to the edge of the realm, where the snow gave way to ash and black trees. Here lies the hollow, he said, voice low, where the last queen fell, where the bond was broken before it was fulfilled. Elira shivered, not from cold, What happened to her? She ran, Alder said simply. She feared the power inside her. The forest mourned her, and in its sorrow the magic twisted. That is the cost of rejecting one's truth. The forest does not punish, it forgets. Elira stepped toward the blackened tree at the hollow's heart. The air was still, lifeless. No wind, no sound. She knelt and pressed her hand to the bark. I remember you, she whispered, and I will not run. As her hand touched the tree, a flicker of green stirred at its base. A single vine. Alive. She turned to Alder. He looked stunned. You brought life back to a forgotten place. Elira stood. Maybe it didn't need power. Maybe it just needed remembrance. They walked back together in silence. That night, the pack howled, not just for her, but with her. Elira sang in wolf form beneath the pink moon, her voice rising with Alder's, her golden streak blazing under moonlight. She was no longer orphan, no longer prey. She was alpha. She was flame. She was the forest's memory and its promise. Chapter 8. The Crown of Snow and Flame. The final moon of winter rose fat and full, casting its pale blush across the snow-laden peaks. It marked the end of the old season, the moment when the forest shifted from slumber to stir. Traditionally, it was a night of silence, of remembrance for the ancestors of the moon court. But this year, it was different. This year, the forest would not be silent, because this year, the queen had awakened. Elira stood at the summit of the high spire, robed in furs dyed with moonroot and lined in threads of starlight. Her crown of woven antler and bone sat upon her braids, now long and shining. Around her neck hung a talisman carved from the first tree, gifted to her by the forest itself in a dream. The talisman pulsed faintly against her skin. Below her, the moon court gathered in the Vale of Echoes, wolves and shifters alike, standing beneath a sky of fire-colored stars. Vesa stood at the front, beside Kale and the rest of the 12. The air trembled with anticipation. Alder stood behind her, silent, regal, and fiercely proud. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. This is your moment, he said. Not because of power, not because of blood, but because you listened. You chose. She turned to face him. I never thought I would belong anywhere. He brushed her cheek. You didn't belong in the world as it was? So you changed it. She nodded. Then she stepped forward. The walk down to the vale was slow, deliberate, symbolic. Each step echoed across the stone. Each breath drew the pack closer. When she reached the bottom, the wolves bowed, not out of fear, but devotion, respect. Elira raised her hands. The veil went quiet. The bond has been fulfilled, she said, her voice clear as snow melt. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. For too long, we have hidden in shadow, bound by tradition, afraid of change. But I was born outside the pack. I am not the echo of the past. I am the voice of the future. The wind stirred around her. The flames in the ceremonial torches rose higher. We will no longer wait for fate to choose us. We will choose ourselves. We will rise, not just as beasts of the night, but as guardians of this realm. And I will walk beside you, not ahead, not above, but with you. A hush fell, then a single howl, then another, and another, until the veil erupted with song. Alder stepped beside her and raised his own voice. Together, their call carried far beyond the mountains, across the rivers and valleys, and into the bones of the earth. The sky above shimmered with stars and snowflakes. That night, there were no boundaries between man and beast, past and future. Only unity, only bond, only truth. Later, as the fires dimmed and the pack returned to their dens, Alder and Elira stood beneath the great silver tree, the one that had marked the beginning of their bond. Do you regret it? He asked, brushing snow from her crown. She shook her head. How could I regret being found? He kissed her gently, a promise and a blessing. The wind whispered through the branches, and the forest, ancient, wild, eternal, smiled. Chapter 9. The Moon's Oath. The first day of thaw came in whispers. Drops of melting snow from the castle's eaves, the rustle of unseen buds in the trees, and the quiet hum of waking earth beneath the pack's paws. Elira stood barefoot in the inner garden, her toes pressing into moss that hadn't stirred in years. The warmth in the soil greeted her like an old friend. She knelt beside a stone that had long been overgrown and traced its edges with her fingers. Carvings emerged, a forgotten crest of a queen from another age. Her name was no longer known, but her memory remained. I remember you, Elira whispered, brushing a curl from her cheek. You walked this place before me. I will not waste what you left behind. The wind shifted. Alder stepped through the archway, watching her. She was the first to offer the oath of the moon, he said, before the world turned bitter, and the pack lost its joy, before the forest grew silent. Elira turned to him. What is the oath? It is not spoken, it is lived. He stepped closer, offering his hand. Come with me. They left the garden and climbed the narrow stairway behind the western tower, a path no one used but the kings of old. At the top, a small room waited. Its walls were glassy stone, its roof open to the sky. In the center stood a bowl carved from a meteorite. Silver light pooled in it, despite no sun or moon above. This is where the oath is seen, Alder said, dipping 2 fingers into the bowl. It shows not who you are, but who you are becoming. Elira stepped forward and peered in. The surface rippled, and then, images bloomed. She saw herself older, wiser, crownless, robed in simple cloth, kneeling beside young wolves and laughing with them. She saw a village rising beyond the trees, not to threaten the forest, but to live with it. She saw children with bright eyes running beside wolves, not afraid. She saw Alder's hand in hers even when their hair had silvered. She saw the forest, thriving, and she saw something else, a child. Heron, a small boy with gold in his eyes and white in his hair, standing barefoot under the same silver tree where she had first said yes. She gasped and stepped back. Alder caught her hand. The future listens when you speak truth. Tears welled in her eyes. He's ours? He nodded. One day, if you still choose this path. Elira turned and looked out at the horizon, where the first green tips of spring dared to show through frost. The forest, once a prison, had become her temple, her calling. She had walked in as a girl with nothing. She stood now as a woman who would rebuild everything. Not with war, not with fear, but with breath, bond, and the will to listen to the wild. Chapter 10. Blood of the Grove. The forest shifted that spring, not in destruction, but in song. A new rhythm hummed through its roots. Trees that had not blossomed in years bore fruit. Rivers ran clear, revealing stones that glowed faintly in moonlight. Animals came closer to the keep, unafraid. The pack felt it in their bones, even those who had never known anything else. Change had come, and it carried Elira's name. Word spread beyond the mountains. Wanderers who had once fled the reach of the Moonborn returned, eyes wide and cautious, carrying stories of the Orphan Queen who tamed the shadow and walked beside wolves. Families with children came seeking shelter. Old ones with faded wolf blood stirred from their hiding places. The castle swelled, not with armies, but with life. Elira welcomed them all. She and Alder worked side by side, not ruling, but guiding. The Moon Court no longer demanded fealty. It offered sanctuary. Packs from the eastern dens sent envoys. The frostbitten shifters from the hollow hills came with songs in their throats and questions in their hearts. All were met with the same quiet strength Elira had once drawn from herself in the snowbound silence of that long-ago night. One evening, as twilight blanketed the castle, Kale found Elira in the southern field where she often walked alone. You've heard, he said softly. She nodded, watching the horizon. A rogue pack moving through the lowlands? They've never come this close. They're looking for the source of the change, she said, not turning. And what will you give them when they arrive? My voice, she said, my name, my truth. Kale was quiet for a moment. Then, we'll protect you. Elira smiled gently. I'm not the one who needs protecting. When the rogue pack finally arrived weeks later, it wasn't with teeth bared. It was with weariness, hunger, suspicion. They were led by a woman with silver hair and green eyes, old enough to remember the forest before it turned silent, young enough to still carry the fire of rebellion in her bones. Her name was Mira. Alder and Elira met them in the courtyard at dusk. We heard the Moonborn had crowned a child, Mira said, skeptical. I crowned myself, Elira replied, calm. And the forest answered. Mira studied her. You carry no blood right, no clan, no alpha line. I carry what remains, Elira said. And what can be? Mira's gaze softened just slightly. We lost everything. I did too, Elira whispered. Silence passed between them. Then Mira stepped forward and placed her palm against Elira's. The air shimmered. The trees leaned in, and the forest welcomed them both. The rogue pack stayed. More came. The keep's once cold halls became loud with laughter and footsteps, with pups racing through corridors and elders singing at the hearth. Rooms were reopened, gardens were planted. The song of the wolves changed, not a howl of sorrow, but a hymn of promise. One moonrise, Elira walked with Alder to the great tree. Without speaking, she placed her hand on its bark. The leaves rustled. She felt it again. that thread of light running from her chest to the tree's heart. I thought I was alone, she whispered. You were waiting, Alder said. For what? For the wild to remember your name. She closed her eyes, and the forest whispered it back. Chapter 11. The Root and the Flame. Summer in the shadow pine was unlike anywhere else. The forest bloomed not just in color, but in memory. Where once there had been snow and silence, now there were lanterns hanging from tree limbs, wolves lounging in dappled sunlight, and songs drifting from open windows of the keep. Elira moved through it all as if she had been born for this life. She knew the names of every pup in the den nursery. She learned the scents of distant storms and the patterns of mushrooms that grew only under certain moons. She spoke with elders who remembered the forest before the curse, and she listened to the young ones dreaming of what the world could be. But power brings trials, even to the kind. One morning, a messenger from the mountain edge arrived breathless and bloodied. The grove is withering, he said. The oldest one. Its leaves have fallen. Its roots are cracked. The grove was sacred, the source of the bond between the wolves and the land. If it died, the balance they'd worked so hard to restore would begin to break. Elira stood silently, her pulse calm, her eyes burning with purpose. Alder came to her side. This has not happened in hundreds of years. Then it must be answered with something that hasn't happened in hundreds of years, she replied. Together, they summoned the 12. In the council hall, she stood before them and said, I will go to the grove. Visa frowned. It lies beyond the ridge of echoes. Few who pass it return. That's because they go in fear, Elira said. I will go in truth. Kale rose from his seat. You won't go alone. No, Alder added, stepping beside her. She never will again. And so they prepared, not with armor or weapons, but with woven cloaks, talismans of bark and vine, and offerings from the keep's hearth. The pack gathered to watch them go, howling in low harmonies as Elira and Alder disappeared into the northern woods. The journey was not easy. The Ridge of Echoes was a place where the wind never stopped, and the rocks sang the voices of the past. At night, the air shimmered with visions. Elira saw her mother's face, though she had never known it. Alder saw his childhood shadow running barefoot through fields that no longer existed. But they kept walking. When they reached the grove, it was worse than they feared. The great tree stood bent and hollowed, its once glowing bark dulled to ash. The roots were curled inward like claws. Around it, the ground was dry, and the air was thick with silence. Elira stepped forward. The forest didn't move. She pressed her hand to the bark. I am Elira, she whispered. Child of no one, queen of the moon court. I do not come to claim you. I come to remember you. A breeze stirred. She dropped to her knees and placed both palms on the earth. Alder knelt beside her. Together they breathed in silence, not commanding, not pleading, just being. Slowly, a heartbeat returned to the earth beneath them. The grove pulsed. Once, faint. Then again, stronger. From the base of the tree, a single green tendril pushed through the dirt. And in that moment, Elira understood. The forest didn't need power. It needed presence. She closed her eyes and whispered, We are here. And the grove awakened. Chapter 12. Heir of the Hollow Moon. When Elira and Alder returned to the moon court, they did not ride in silence. They walked side by side, barefoot on soft moss, hands linked, followed by a quiet procession of the 12 and a dozen wolves who had joined them along the way. Word had already reached the keep. Whispers carried on leaves and starlight. The grove lived. The bond held. But it was what Elira carried in her silence that shifted everything. At first, she said nothing. Not to the pack, not to the council, not even to Alder. She simply resumed her duties, welcoming the newcomers who crossed into the forest, tending to the den pups, walking the gardens at night with the wind in her hair, and her feet kissing the earth like an old friend. And then, on the night of the crescent moon, she stood in the courtyard and summoned them all. The veil filled again. Old wolves, new shifters, humans who had sought the forest's protection, children with mixed bloodlines running circles around their elders. Lanterns lit the high walls, casting warm light on ancient stone. Elira stood at the center, cloaked in white, her gold-streaked hair braided over her shoulder. She lifted her hand, and the crowd hushed. There is something growing, she said simply, her voice soft but undeniable. Not just in the grove, not just in the bond. She placed her hand on her belly. In me. Gasps and low murmurs rippled through the courtyard. Some covered their mouths. Some bowed their heads. Some smiled through tears. Alder stepped behind her, his hand resting gently over hers. Our child will be the first of a new bloodline, she said. Born not of one world, but of both. Not just moonborn, but freeborn. Chosen, not by fate or fear, but by love. The wind stirred, lifting her cloak like wings. This child will not rule alone. He will grow with the pack. He will learn from the old ones and the young. And one day, when the time is right, he will lead not as king, but as keeper. Not with power, but with presence. Alder kissed her temple. He will walk in the light you gave back to the forest. From the back of the crowd, a pup howled. Then another. Then, slowly, all around them, voices rose. High and low, old and young. A song of beginnings. A lullaby to the unborn. The moon above shone faint and hollow, still waiting to be filled. And in that shape, the forest saw its heir. No one left the courtyard that night unchanged. They stayed and sang, danced barefoot in the dirt, shared stories beside fires, whispered prayers into the wind. The castle walls no longer echoed with loneliness. They breathed with life. Later, as stars gave way to morning, Elira stood at the silver tree and placed her palm against its bark. "You were right," she whispered. "The wild remembers." Behind her, Alder waited, and within her, the next chapter stirred. Chapter 13. The Last Light of Winterfall. The snow came late that year, long after the leaves had curled into copper and crimson. Long after the den pups had grown long limbs and longer teeth. Long after the grove had bloomed into fullness, and the moon court had become not just a home, but a heartbeat in the center of the world. It came softly, like a final breath. Elira stood at the edge of the eastern watchtower, her hands clasped over her belly, her crown forgotten on the table behind her. The first flakes fell in silence, drifting slowly over the stone battlements, catching in her hair and melting on her skin. The air was sharp, but not cruel. She closed her eyes and breathed it in. The cold, the quiet, the knowing. She was 8 moons along now. The child grew stronger every day, his kicks like small promises. Alder said he dreamed of him often, of the boy running through the woods, laughing with wolves, climbing trees too tall for reason, and returning with answers no one had taught him. Elira had no dreams. She had memory, of walking barefoot through ash, of the trembling in her limbs when Alder had first held out his hand, of the pull in her chest as the forest claimed her, not in force, but in understanding. And she remembered the first time she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. That was what the child would be born into. Not perfection, not peace, but presence. A world that saw him, a world that listened. Alder joined her, as he always did. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, and they stood like that for a long while. "He'll be born before the 13th moon," Elira murmured. "Yes. He'll never know the world as we did." "No." She turned to face him, her gaze steady. "Will he carry the weight of it anyway?" Alder looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Not wait. Memory. They walked the keep together after that. Past the library, where children were now taught by a rotating circle of elders and lore keepers. Past the garden that bloomed even in frost, fed by warm springs beneath the stone. Past the quarters where old wolves lay beside human companions. Their breaths synced, their dreams shared. Elira greeted each of them by name. She knew them now. Every face, every story. Some called her Mother Moon. Others simply bowed with a grin. But most greeted her the same way they greeted each other. With warmth and ease, like an old friend returning home. Later, she retreated to her chamber and lit the silver flame on the altar at the foot of her bed. It was tradition now. Not a requirement, not an expectation, but a habit that grounded her. Tonight, she whispered not prayers, but memories. To the mother she never knew. To the old queen who had withered in silence. To the child in her womb who would open doors she herself had only ever knocked on. The flame danced higher. She felt a sudden tightness, like the forest had clenched around her. Then, a pain, not sharp, but deep, low and anchoring. She breathed slowly, placing her hand to her stomach. Alder was there in moments. He knelt before her, his hands steady, his eyes calm. "It's time." Elira did not cry out. She did not break. The den mothers came. Vesa stayed at her side. Kale waited outside the room with the 12, each of them silent but ready. The forest darkened. The torches flickered low. And the sky above the keep turned violet. Hours passed, maybe more. Elira was caught in a tide she could not swim from, only breathe through. Alder never left her side, not once. He whispered stories to her between waves of pain. Old tales of moonborn kings and queens, of children born under eclipses and comets, of a forest that once believed it would never love again. And then, a cry, The child's first breath came like thunder, breaking the hush of winter. A boy, red with life, fierce with voice, eyes already edged in gold. They placed him in Elira's arms, and everything fell still. He was warm and wriggling, and he blinked up at her with curiosity that felt centuries old. The room faded. The past faded. Even pain faded. Only this remained. This perfect, strange, beautiful life that should not have been, but was. She kissed his forehead, and the forest answered. Outside, the grove lit up. The silver tree glowed so brightly that its light reached the sky, bouncing off the stars, waking every creature in the realm. Wolves howled, not in alarm, but in harmony. The bond had renewed. Alder touched the child's cheek. What will we name him? Elira whispered it like a secret she'd known since before she was born. Solon, after the last light before a new dawn. The boy cooed, and Alder smiled. The days that followed were like a dream she never wanted to wake from. Solon was strong. He laughed often. He reached for leaves and listened to the wind like it was telling him stories only he could understand. He did not cry at the howl of wolves. Instead, he tilted his head and answered with sounds that made the oldest ones look at each other and nod knowingly. The pack adored him. The den pups bowed to him when they thought no one was looking. Elders carved charms in his name. Even the stone of the keep seemed to shift around him. Hallways grew warmer, windows stretched wider. Flowers bloomed where his feet had wandered. One night in late summer, Elira took Solon to the same clearing where she had first touched the silver tree. He was only half a year old, still wrapped in her arms, yet alert. She sat beneath the tree and whispered, I once thought the forest was cruel, that it took people and left them with silence. The wind stirred the leaves above. I was wrong. The forest was listening. I just didn't know how to answer yet. She laid Solon on a blanket of moss and watched him reach for the sky. You will grow up loved. You will grow up free. And when the world tries to shape you, you will remember. Your name is not just a word. It is a seed. He babbled, as if in agreement, and gripped a falling leaf in his fist. Alder appeared behind her and sat beside them. Together, they watched the stars rise. I've never asked, she said quietly, what you feared most before I came. Alder didn't answer immediately. He lay back, one hand behind his head, the other gently tracing patterns in Solon's hair. I feared time, he said at last, that I would live long enough to forget what love felt like, that I would turn into stone, immortal and empty. And now I remember everything. They lay there as night deepened and the moon rose high, full, round, and burning with soft fire. No guards stood at the border. No enemies approached. No one dreamed of war. For the first time in generations, the moon court held no fear. Only breath, only bond, only truth. And in the heart of the forest, beneath a silver tree that remembered everything, it began again. The end.